PI Perspectives.
Today I want to talk to you about the Investigator's Toolbox. Many of the folks who listen to this program actually have already signed up and have joined this online community for investigators and the investigative community. It's a place to go for networking. It's a place to go for continuing education, watching webinars, doing your continuing education credit. It's a place also to read up on the latest trends in the industry, stay on top of all the news articles. It's actually supported by some really, really great businesses that support our industry. They're offering discounts and benefits actually for your membership. And then the OSINT catalog. We've got a huge OSINT catalog that you can make your own private library. You essentially pick and choose what you want to be in your library, however you do your research. Check it out today. It's www.investigators-toolbox.com. Listeners of the show, if you use the code PIP201836, you'll save an extra 20%. Investigators-toolbox.com. Go check it out today.
Are you overwhelmed with your current caseload? Could you use some help with your skip trace assignments? With Merlin Locate Services, rather than adding staff, you can add an entire skip trace department of licensed private investigators who specialize in skip tracing. Check out merlinlocate.com today. When you work with Merlin Locate Services, you bring on a valuable experience and trusted extension to your team. Welcome to PI Perspectives. Brian Willingham of Diligentia Group joins us today to chat. Brian has a fantastic blog and is a well-respected writer in the investigative community. He recently wrote a great article about crossing state lines as a PI doing investigative work. So let's drop in on Matt and Brian and get their take on this interesting subject. Please welcome Brian Willingham and your host, private investigator Matt Spaier.
And welcome everybody to this week's episode of PI Perspectives. Well, I am honored here today to have a friend of mine, somebody who's a conference buddy. Brian Willingham is joining us today. Brian, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it being on.
Yeah, I know we had talked a while back about having you on and just waiting for everything to line up with our schedules and all that. So I appreciate you taking time to come on and do this. So tell me what's going on. How's biz?
Well, 2021 has started off with a little bang for all of us, but business has been okay. We actually were up a little bit last year. So, obviously, things sort of changed with everything that happened back in March and everything shutting down. So certainly the mix of things has certainly changed quite a bit. But, most of my work, I don't do a lot of field work. I do a lot of sitting behind my computer and I do a lot of interviews from behind my desk. So, being out in the field and being in person and knocking on doors is not something that was always, this didn't affect that much, obviously. But obviously, the world being on fire the way it is, it certainly was a challenging year just from sort of shifting gears and trying to help out however I can.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you're in New York here with me, so there was that whole question of, are we essential services? Are we not essential? What are we doing? I'm going to keep working. It's like, yes, I'm going to keep working. And I know on my end, being involved with my state association and actually talking to the lobbyist and making sure that we were able to do what we were able to do, I can confidently say, like, yes, we are essential services as per, the business law, general business law, we're good to go. So that was good. But there was a shift in the type of work. And that's something you and I had talked about offline, where you weren't sure where the business was coming from, but the end of the year it came. So
yeah, listen, I mean, the world has become much more virtual over the past 10 years or so. And I've sort of been waiting for that moment, like retail is dead, people going into stores or, doing it face-to-face interviews or knocking on doors is a little bit, it's a little bit ancient, so to speak. You can do a lot of these things via Zoom or via telephone calls or doing interviews or taking statements, or we were talking about doing, notaries over Zoom calls. Crazy. So, it's just the way that the world has been going, and I wasn't ready. Nobody was ready for a pandemic. But certainly the way that I've operated over the past couple of years, I've always been a person that could grab my laptop and work from anywhere. So I wasn't ready for it, but at least I was somewhat prepared.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I had the good fortune of doing Zoom for quite some time before the pandemic hit. So it's like Zoom. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Let's do it. I wasn't like scratching my head like, how does this thing work?
Yeah, totally. And now people are much more comfortable with it too. Like if you wanted, like, if you're doing an interview with somebody, maybe like, hey, if you want to feel more comfortable jumping on a Zoom call, they're like, yeah, sure. It's more of the lexicon. It's more of a regular thing now. So
Sure. Yeah. And it's interesting that you're saying that, because what I've noticed in general, just even practicing and doing investigative work, it used to be everything was 100% by the book. It had to be this way, no other way. And there was that expectation, especially with attorneys. There's a certain expectation that something's going to get done a certain way, policies, procedures, all that other stuff. Throw all that out the window. Like, they got shorts on and a suit jacket on, and they're doing depositions. Like, everything is just topsy-turvy. And at the end of the day, all they really care about is it getting done, and is it getting done properly? How you got from point A to point C. Like, I don't care about B, like, don't fill me in with that. I don't need to micromanage the details.
Yep.
Just get it done. And I found that whole micromanagement, I don't know if you experience the same thing, but the whole micromanagement from my clients definitely took a step back.
Yeah, it's much more relaxed. I mean, for sure. I mean, like, I have a lot of being where we are. I live in Westchester County, just north of New York City. And a lot of people commute to the city. They either work on Wall Street or have big law firms or whatever. And for years, I'd either work from home or remotely or however I wanted. And, for them, they sit on a train they commute for 3 hours a day. And I never had that. And all of a sudden it was required, people who never thought that they could work from home now work from home, and they figured out how to do it. So, the world has become a little bit more relaxed in the sense that, like, it doesn't matter how you get your stuff done. It just matters how you get it, if you get it done.
I think a lot of them don't even want to go back. It's like, no. I don't see that 5-day-a-week thing happening anymore, which is great. I mean, I've been doing it too, just like you. I've been doing it the same way,
Yeah, I mean, listen, commuting is, I think, one of the biggest wastes of times of God's creation. I mean, like, the idea that you spend 15 hours a week, commuting to places that you don't necessarily need to be is heartbreaking to me. Like, I mean, listen, it's always nice to have a little downtime. I mean, being parents, you like having that little downtime, but at the end of the day, I'd rather be close to home and sitting near home, no matter what. So
I'm right there with you. The only exception I would say is if that's the time that you listen to podcasts.
Yep.
And you need to find some time to do that.
Fair enough. Yeah.
That's the only asterisk I'll put on there.
Yep. Yeah. My commute is 1 mile, which we talked about a little bit earlier. Sure. So I don't really get those chances to listen to a whole lot of podcasts. So I'll take a long drive by myself, or my teenage kids get their earphones on and they don't want to sit in the car with me. And so that's the only time I really get to do it. So more road trips for me.
That's good, right? Or, once we have conferences and you're out and about, you got a flight with a couple hours to kill. And,
yep.
Good way to do
totally.
Totally. So, well, that's good, man. So your company specializes in a certain area, right? You do a lot of due diligence. That's kind of your background.
Yeah, so I kind of grew up in this age of online research. So I don't call myself an OSINT investigator, open source intelligence investigator. I do a lot of really deep background investigations on people, places, things relating to, due diligence, and if a company is investing in another company, whether it's a private equity or a venture capital investment, and they're investing tens of millions of dollars. They want to make sure that the people that are working there, and the CEO and the CFO, are above board and don't have any issues. But also it applies in litigation. When there's high stakes litigation, there's an expert witness that, is the key to the whole entire case. And they want to make sure that everything about them is buttoned up and I's dotted and T's crossed.
Sure.
Or a major person in a criminal defense case that is going to be testifying against their client. They want to know everything about them. What they ate for breakfast, if they were arrested for a felony or jaywalking. So I sort of spend a lot of time on that. I've had the pleasure of working on deep background investigations on potential vice presidential candidates, and worked on all kinds of sort of really interesting cases. So that's where I've sort of gathered my specialty.
Yeah, it's great, man. It's like you find the thread, you pull on the thread, and you just keep going until you find what you can find. And next thing you know, you're sitting in someone's MySpace account going, how did I get here? Right.
Totally. You never know where you're going to end up. With every one of these things, you never know where you're going to end up.
Yeah, I know there's some, one of the OSINT researchers, when I started really getting involved with this, they're like, listen, you got to have a strong constitution because you're going to see some really awful things online, and you got to learn that it's just normal, and it just, keep it moving and go on to the next thing. Because you really don't know what you're going to come.
No, you really don't. I mean, like, listen, everybody comes to you with these questions, problems. What are we going to find? Can you find this? And you have no idea. People have this. Some people have secret lives, and whether it's under some weird profile they have. When people close their doors at home, you never know what goes on beyond there. And some people know somebody on the surface, and they think they know them. But do they really know them? Do they have, a history of litigation? Have they, been charged with other things that so listen, you never know what you're going to come up with. And that's sort of part of the hunt and part of the fun of it in doing this kind of work.
Yeah. That's really what kind of led me into doing investigative work. That whole passion of trying to figure out why something happened. How did it happen? Like, and having that theory, that positive of, I think it would happen this way. Now let me go work it through and see if I was close or if I got it or not. It's just that whole passion. Cause I did consider law at one point. Right. And it was like, okay, do I want to become a lawyer? I lined up to go to law school, and I was like, I like the investigative stuff better. It's more fulfilling for me to find out why something.
Yeah, listen, I think it's much more fulfilling. It's challenging too. I mean, like, you don't get the same thing over and over again, the same cases over and over again. I have no idea what I'm doing 2 weeks from now. And I may be working on a whole different kind of business, or doing a whole different background, doing a research or interviews on a topic that I had no idea about. So it's like, it's part of that, hunger of finding information and just asking questions. And, it keeps you on your toes. I mean, like, there's never been a point where I'm like, I'm really bored and I don't know what I'd I got to go do this again tomorrow. Yeah. Rarely ever like that.
Yeah. And, the folks that embrace it the way you and I do, like, you'll never get tired of your job. Like, I don't see myself stepping down. I just love doing it. It's,
no, and it brings, there's, like I said, I'm beating a dead horse here, but it brings new challenges every day. Like last week, the day before New Year's Eve, or a couple of weeks ago, I got a call from a local friend who's, somebody had passed away under sort of mysterious circumstances, and they wanted me to help sort of secure some video from around the neighborhood that may have shown people coming in and out of the house and things like that. That's not sort of my regular sort of caseload, but it's certainly something I'm capable of doing. And it was fun. It was on New Year's Eve, which nobody really wants to work New Year's Eve, but I went out and I did it and was able to gather some really interesting stuff. So it's sort of a new challenge, sort of a new thing every day, every week, every month, and you just keep going on from there.
Yeah. I mean, I'm 15 and a half years into that lifestyle of not knowing where I'm going to be on Tuesday.
Yep.
And if you're like worrisome about that stuff, it could put you in the grave early. But I just have faith that it's going to be there, and it has. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, I think every investigative, the way that this business works, there's ups and downs. There's always going to be ups and downs, and sometimes you get a little, back in the early days when I first started, I would get panicky when I didn't have like a day's worth of work. And even now I do too, but things always seem to work out. And it's part of the fun of it. It's certainly, you have to sort of constantly be prepared for it. And, you may have something that comes in Friday night and you have to work all weekend, and that's part of the thrill of it. It can drive people nuts too, though.
The cost of doing business.
Yep, it totally is.
And, and that's why I think, like, during the pandemic shutdowns and all that, like, you pivot, right? So it's like, okay, it's slow. So what am I doing now? There was this rush to do continuing education. There was a rush to, do client maintenance, and, and every couple of weeks, it was something new that you got to do and make sure you're doing. Like, I've gotten to the point now with clients, it's really funny. I used to go have lunch with them and catch up. And now we brown bag it and we just do our Zoom meetings. You eat your lunch, I'll eat my lunch, and let's just catch up and talk. And it's weird, but it works,
Yeah.
So,
Listen, these kind of things, I always try to find sort of lessons and positives out of any good, bad, or indifferent situation. I did it, just last week, just looking back on 2020, what's the difference here? But I think it gives you time to reflect too. Like, how am I being helpful to my clients? What can I do better? If there's something that, that I haven't been able to sort of spend time learning a new skill or finding some new sort of detail that other people don't know about. So it certainly gives you time to sit back and reflect. So there's not all bad comes out of these things. It's some good. And eventually, I know a lot of small businesses have suffered, but at the end of the day, sort of the cream rises to the top, and the people that are going to be sort of left are the ones that have been able to pivot and provide really valuable services to their clients.
I think you're right. I think, the folks in our industry, especially, that really their hearts weren't into doing the work are like, this is a good excuse maybe for me to finally just call it quits and retire. And that just creates opportunity for others. And if you're positioned properly, you can really capitalize on it. I know I've picked up a bunch of new clients. I actually, I look back, I worked with more clients this year than I did the year before.
Yeah.
Go figure.
But, or if it's, if it's a matter of, I've been doing it this way for so long and it's not working. Like, now you need to pivot. You need to figure out what, I imagine the people that, completely relied on surveillance. I've heard that, surveillance investigators are busier than ever now, but obviously there was a month there where you're not doing any surveillance. So
cyclical, it comes and goes. And even, with money on that, to pay for it, they're going to spend, they're not going to spend. It's so cyclical, how that all works, and budget wise, it can be frustrating. I'm with you, man. I'm not on the surveillance game. I know a lot of really good ones, guys that do that stuff and girls that do it, but not for me.
No, I can't sit in the car and pee in a Gatorade bottle for too long. I've done it before. It's exhilarating. Most people don't realize how boring and tedious it is. There's moments of absolute, your heart is racing. There's exhilaration. Some of the best stories that I've told about the work that I've done relate to surveillance, but I don't want to be doing that every day.
Yeah. I mean, I remember hearing the story about when you were surveilled, which I thought was really funny.
I was. So we had a little counter surveillance going on there too. So yeah.
Spy games.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to take a break real quick. And when we come back, actually, I wanted to get into the blog that you do, which is an amazing blog. And talk about some of the things that you've been writing about. You just put out a really interesting article. Actually, we're going to focus on that a little bit, on crossing state lines, doing investigative work. Thumbs up, thumbs down. How you should approach it. So everyone sit tight, and we will be right back.
PI Perspectives.
Are you using a case management system? The answer is no. You should really rethink that process. Right. So as you guys know, Crosstracks has been an amazing sponsor of the show. They've just been really supportive. As you guys also know, I didn't used to have a case management system. I was the investigator that was fighting them tooth and nail. I finally decided to give it a whirl. What a great decision, right? During the COVID shutdown, I was able to actually roll my whole business into it and get completely up and running. And my clients love it. I mean, just today, I got a phone call from a client of mine who just couldn't believe how easy it was to access everything and how invoices were there. He actually asked me to go back and upload all my prior cases and put it into Crosstracks. I've been doing business with that firm for, about 8 years, so it's a lot of cases. Yeah, if you don't use a case management system, you should, right? You should check it out. Give Crosstracks a shot. Contact Brad or one of the teammates over there, and they'll get you up and running with a trial and see if it's for you. If you have used Crosstracks and it's been a while and you're not happy with the system that you're in, go check them out. They're doing a lot of really cool new things, and see if it's right for you. If you're unhappy with the system that you're in right now, contact them. The ability for them to roll your system into their system is very easy. Again, you guys know they've been sponsoring this program, and I can't say enough good things about them, but make your own decision, right? Give it a shot on your own and see if it's right for you.
Gain greater insight into people, assets, businesses, and their interrelationships with IDI's next generation investigative platform, IDI Core. Through a massive data repository, advanced data fusion technology, and more intuitive UI, IDI Core uncovers the relevance of disparate data points, providing actionable intelligence to support your investigations. Register for a free trial at ididata.com/PI Perspectives or call 844-778-1740, 844-778-1740. What do you do when you get calls for bug sweeps? Did you know USABugSweeps.com, the #1 TSCM provider in the country, pays you a 20% commission for converted sales leads? Stop turning money away. USABugSweeps.com uses top-rated technology, and they cover all of the United States. So save time and make money today. Contact USABugSweeps.com and mention PIP20. Check out the PI Institute of Education at piinstitute.com. Since 1989, Kelly Riddle has been teaching on subjects such as surveillance, nursing home investigations, insurance fraud, domestic investigations, hidden assets, and accident scene investigations. The PI Institute of Education is a featured learning partner in the investigatorstoolbox.com. So check out the free content on the site, then visit the Institute for more great savings on additional classes. Have you heard about the free FAPI conference next month? Check out the link in the show notes and set aside some time on February 17th through February 19th. Speakers include past guests like John A. Hoda, Michelle Stewart, and Jim Nanos. Learn more at www.myfapi.org. That's myfapi.org.
And welcome everybody back to PI Perspectives. This is Matt Spaier, your host. I'm here with Brian Willingham. Brian, welcome back to the program.
Thanks again. Good to be back.
Yeah. So just a couple of guys from New York shooting the breeze today. We talked a little bit before the break about your writing and your blog, which you've got quite a reputation, sir, in the community for having a very useful blog. And I know writing is a passion of yours. So tell me a little bit how you got into that and what's the idea behind it.
So it's a great question. It's sort of a long story, but so I started my business in 2009, and I went out on my own. And I'd sort of gotten the blogging bug in the previous company that I was working for. I'd started writing articles about sort of current events and sort of things that were going on. And I started getting this like following, and it was like addictive, sort of getting like, oh my God, people are actually like looking at this stuff. So when I went out in business, this was 11 years ago. And one of the things that I really wanted to do was to talk about some things in the investigative community that nobody really talked about. I mean, we have sort of a reputation in our business of being sort of close to the vest. People don't tell their secrets.
Sure.
And don't really talk about the things that go on in our industry and those kind of things. So I made it a point to, sort of talk about those things. And it sort of got some blowback early on about like, hey, you can't tell how we do these things. And I just kept doing it. And it was interesting because, at the beginning, I think my mom and my wife were the only people that were actually looking at it. But over the time, you start developing a voice, and over the years it's become a pretty popular thing. And I really at the beginning, it was more meant to be like, I'm trying to get some business, trying to get some thoughts on paper.
Sure.
It was a way to sort of clarify some of my thoughts about things. Writing obviously makes it is very different than just talking about it or whatever. And it just sort of grew from there. I've written 300 blog posts at this point. I've written for Pursuit Magazine and PI Magazine and the ACFE. And it's become sort of a passion of mine. I've kind of been known for it at this point, and how a lot of people have ultimately found me. So
yeah, no, you definitely got some street cred. the articles are good. It's not like just like, well, here's what I'm going to talk about today, and this is just my opinion on things. No, you back things up with facts, and yeah, there's your opinion on things, but there's weight behind it, right? You're not a new jack to the industry, and I think the arguments are valid. The points that you make are always valid.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Listen, I think I try to tackle some challenging subjects too, like the one that we're about to talk about. These are, you don't see it written about very often, and it's not talked about. You probably talk about it with other investigators. I have a big community of other investigators that were like, hey, we talk to each other a lot. Like, hey, I've come up with this situation. How would you handle it, or what would you do?
Sure.
So this is one of the things that came up with the local investigator who was like, hey, how would you handle this? And I was like, hey, do you mind if I write a blog post about this? Because this is a topic I think other people want to hear about.
Yeah. So let's dive right into that then. So basically, it's a question of whether or not you cross state lines while you're in the course of an investigation. So tell me how you, obviously, I guess you said you had another investigator talk to you about it. How did you start to research it and come to the opinion that you came to on this?
So this is something that I've had strong opinion about it for quite some time. This was a little bit different. This was a surveillance investigator, it was a local surveillance investigator, and he was always under the impression that, if he'd started, if the case was domiciled here in New York, that he was able to do surveillance, even though the person lived in New York or Connecticut or whatever. The case was based, the lawsuit that was going on was based here. And that he'd never really had an issue with it. Some of the big attorney law firms that he worked for never had an issue with it. He clearly has never been called out on it in court. And that's how it sort of came up. And he said, I know that there's something out there that says that I can do this. And my immediate answer to him was, I don't think you can do this. I think if you're not licensed in that state and you're starting in another state, you really need to be licensed in that state. And that's the way I've always operated. I don't do a lot of surveillance. So surveillance is not my sort of core business. So that's how it sort of initially came up. And, his initial reaction back to me was like, you're wrong.
I hate you.
And I'm going to prove you wrong. No, but so I reached out to a couple of local investigators that I work with, and both of them happen to be attorneys. One is a general counsel of a big investigative firm, and another one's a local solo operator who's also an attorney. So they're not giving me legal opinions on this stuff, but I think like a lot of things in the investigative industry, there's always this sort of gray-ish area.
Please consult a lawyer, people. This is not legal advice today.
Yeah. So, and I wanted to get their opinion on how they would operate it. So that's how the sort of whole ball started getting rolling.
Yeah. And listen, you bring up some interesting points, and, it's always in the back of your mind. I thought one of the interesting points that you had brought up in the article was the fact that if it actually started in another state and then came into New York, why don't you talk a little bit about that? What was your thought on that?
So here is my thought process on the whole thing. I do a lot of interview work. So if I was ever to go do an interview I'm licensed in New York, I'm not licensed in Connecticut or New Jersey. Right. If I were to go into New Jersey to interview somebody, I would need to have somebody who is with me who is licensed. And I think that's sort of the general MO of how people generally operate. And what I said to him was like, that was how I always operated. If he was in New York doing a surveillance in New York and had to cross over state lines, that is certainly where it becomes like this gray area. My point to him, and the point that I made in the article was, I don't think anybody's going to give you that much problem by going, you're continuing your investigation. They happen to go in another state. But again, it always depends. I don't think
trial by jury, right? And someone moves to have it precluded, and now all of a sudden it's sidebar, and it's like, let's have a decision, and you're living up to a judge and their impression of what's right and what's not right. Maybe the judge doesn't like the one attorney, and he's like, I'm not giving that to you.
That's absolutely right. And, maybe some of the evidence that was collected in New York would be okay, but whatever you collected in the other state, or they would just get rid of all of it because, or whatever reason. So there's like 1,000 different things that could happen. And the way I generally operate, try to be as ethical and above board as possible. And I'm always trying to, you have to, but you have to think about these things ahead of time. Most of the things that I do are not going to end up in front of a judge or a trial. But you have to sort of think about those things, because the last thing you would want is collecting some piece of information that was the smoking gun or whatever the case may be, and have all of a sudden all of it be thrown out because you did something that, you weren't either didn't think was illegal, that wasn't appropriate. So.
Yeah, and then just make sure your premiums are paid up for your liability insurance, because that's the next shoe that falls off.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And what's one of the interesting things that came out of this is that I'm not aware of a whole lot of case law surrounding this. You might be, but when I wrote the article, this is one of the things that I really appreciate about blogging and writing, is that once I wrote the article, I got 3 or 4 emails from people that, hey, there's this case in Pennsylvania where the guy crossed state lines, and you may want to check this out. And there was another one in California. So there's, it sort of creates this dialogue. And now I'm sort of collecting some of this case law about it. And if there is case law out there, there was one guy who apparently was charged with a felony for crossing state lines. And they were originally weren't going to prosecute him, and there was another case that happened in Connecticut, and New York, in which the judge threw out all the evidence that was collected. It was a couple of former MOAPD people who were doing surveillance cross state lines, and the judge threw it all out. So listen, there's certainly, it's a valid question, and I don't think anybody goes into these things saying, hey, I don't care, I'm going to do everything the way I want to, but these are sort of things that you need to think about.
I almost feel like the judge probably did that because he read General Business Law 7. And if you do read General Business Law 7, it clearly states you have to be licensed by the state of New York to do investigative work in New York State. So, to me, if you're in New Jersey and you're coming into New York and you don't have a license, it's pretty clear you can't do that. If you follow that law. And that's probably why he did that,
Yeah, for sure. I think over time, investigation has obviously changed over the years. I mean, I totally think that people should need to be licensed in their states, and most states have licensing. The couple that don't, I still don't understand.
We're losing them.
Yeah, but I think there should be, these states should be able to talk to each other. There's some sort of reciprocity agreement. The world is not, the world is getting to be a bigger place, and the fact that you can't go into the next state for any period of time. Like, listen, if you were constantly going into another state, I would imagine that state would want you to be licensed. But if there was some short period of time and you can just notify them, like, hey, I'm a licensed investigator in New York, there's some investigations that's taking me into their state, signing a form and whatever, and getting that approved. You would think that would be something that would happen. And I know you're much more involved with the state associations than I am. So then maybe that's something that is, in the works or talks.
Yeah, there's been some discussion about that. And it's something, both on the national scale with NCISS and with the state association, Aldenese in New York. These are discussions that we've had. And, it's something to definitely look at. But, it's very interesting. I think what it all comes down to is money, right? The state just wants to collect their money. You go and you get your license in Connecticut. Like, it's expensive. I think it's like $1,500 a year.
Is it really?
Oh, it's ridiculous. Yeah. Like really, really out of control. And if you're going to start shelling out, $500 here, $1,500 there, $400 there for all that, it's like, okay, well, how much work do I actually do in the state? It isn't even worthwhile for me to do it. So yeah, there's considerations.
But kind of going along what we were talking about before, the world is becoming much more virtual place. Like, I can interview. Is it okay for me to interview somebody in California and not physically go there? I think the answer is generally yes. I'm calling on a telephone. So the world and the research that we do online. I mean, I can pull court records in Pennsylvania and do a background check on somebody in Pennsylvania. It doesn't matter that I'm physically based there. So, I think the states need to sort of catch up to the way that the world is sort of operating.
We came across this with the notaries, right? Where, you can do notaries online now. You don't have to do it, have the person in front of you. You got to follow this guideline. You got to follow that line. The governor of New York signed off on an executive order 207, I think it was, which by the way is extended again. So it clearly states in there that they have to show you ID, like they have to provide themselves, and both parties have to be in the state of New York. And I feel like there are attorneys out there that take this, we can notarize stuff, and they have out-of-state people, and I'm just gonna throw my stamp on there. It's cool, and that they're not really doing what they're supposed to do. Now, going back to what we were saying earlier, how things are much more lax now. Is someone really gonna follow up on that? Probably not. But if you want to get to being the stickler of like, this is not a correct acknowledgement, we need to throw it out, this affidavit needs to go in the garbage, you can make that argument.
Yeah, and listen, I the way I operate is I try to be way not coming close to that gray line is not somewhere where I ever want to be. So like there in situations like this, like, if I'm doing surveillance and I'm about to cross the state line, I might be calling the attorney and be like, listen, I need to get a Connecticut investigator immediately and follow him from here on out so that, this doesn't become an issue. So listen, you have to, follow these things as close to the law as possible for that, scenario in which that, it could become an issue.
A very smart attorney told me a long time ago, always know how you're going to lose your case, right? So if you could be proactive and just figure out like, okay, how are they going to come out at me with how can this potentially be thrown out, and just plan contingency, I think you'll be okay. You'll be all right.
One of the things that surprised me out of this is that, that these attorneys that he works with, which are obviously from very legitimate big law firms, and nobody on the other side, I mean, he's been in business for 20 plus years. Nobody's ever caught him. I don't know how many he's actually done, but nobody's ever questioned it. So, listen, that was sort of the point I was making in the article too, is that, how much is this? Are you really going to get punished by your state association if you did it one time? Yeah. I doubt it.
So here's the answer to that, because I can speak to New York and the board that I'm on. So Aldenius for a long time had been pushing for a felony charge for anyone operating as a private investigator that wasn't actually a licensed PI. And we went back and forth. We had Lee Zeldin involved for a while before he ended up going down to Washington full time. And we have a great lobbyist, Fred Altman, up in New York that was working on it. And we weren't able to get the felony. We got a misdemeanor. I think it's a B misdemeanor, which is still some jail time. But if you're operating without a license in the state of New York, potentially you could face misdemeanor charges. Now, with that being said, I'll reference your article. Ain't nobody bringing charges. And even, I got to be honest with you, we've turned in a couple of people. We get the anonymous phone calls from people looking, someone's operating. I haven't seen the Department of State go after anybody on any of this stuff either. And this law has been on the books for probably about 4 or 5 years now.
And to parlay on what you just said, I mean, one of the big stories that's come out in New York, or big stories in general, is this firm BlackQ, which is an Israeli intelligence firm, which was operating in New York for Mr. Harvey Weinstein. And they were working with some local investigators, but they were doing all kinds of crazy stuff, operating physically based here in New York. And I imagine that they sort of got around it by, hiring a local investigator, but they were sort of out on the side if you read some of the articles that Ronan Farrow wrote. And one of the interesting things that came out in that is that, one of the investigators, the local investigators, who's a licensed private investigator in New York, he was doing some really shady things as well. And as far as I know, he's still got a license, and nobody's done anything to him.
Every now and then they catch people. There was a guy recently that was spying for China.
Right, I saw that.
He got nailed. So they don't always get away, but yeah. I think if it's if it's a matter of like procedural wise, I really don't think they're going to come down hard on you. But why take that chance, right? You do open yourself up to liability. So I think getting back to the point that you were saying earlier about not walking close to that gray line, I'm the same way, man, because I have testified. I have gone in federal court and I have gone in state Supreme Court and been on the stand. And I don't want somebody digging into my thing going, hey, you did this on your taxes, or you had this thing that you lied about on your resume, or this, like, that's career suicide for us, you know?
Yeah.
And I know because I've seen it. I've replaced investigators that have lied about a previous criminal conviction or DWI, or got caught on a case where they did something unethically, and it right down the gone. I've replaced them. You're our investigator now because this other guy wasn't honest. Okay, great. Bad for him.
Yeah.
Good for me.
Yeah.
I've seen it happen.
Yeah, and listen, I think, kind of getting back to what we were talking about before, that some states have these reciprocity agreements with other states. California has like 6 or 7. North Carolina has some with their surrounding states, and it just makes sense. I mean, like, yeah, we should really all do that, and just like, getting into the 21st century here.
Right. Yeah. Damn the fees that are involved.
Yeah.
I think even with like New Jersey, because I had looked into getting my license in New Jersey, because I'm like, I do get those calls, and I have a great bunch of New Jersey investigators that I use. And actually, one of my guys actually lives in New Jersey now that works for me. And I'm like, oh, we should maybe think about getting our Jersey license. You physically have to have a business address there in order to do that. You can't just say, I operate in New York, but I want that New Jersey license. That's like the one big deal breaker that you actually have to have.
Yeah, I think most states are similar too, and I think that's like a deal breaker. And again, it's just this very old school thinking. Like, I need to have somebody physically based there in order to be operating there, which doesn't need to be the case.
So what kind of advice, we're going to take a left turn here. What kind of advice would you give to an investigator who is thinking about blogging and saying, I really have this passion for being heard and I want to say things. How do I start? How do I get involved in this?
That's a good question. It takes quite a while. So one of the points that I made before is that it took me a long time to sort of get an audience. And one of the things that, when I originally did this, I was doing it as a sort of business generator. I wanted for attorneys to find me. I wanted, private equity firms to find me. I wanted investors to find me. I wanted people to be able to find me because I was writing about stuff. What's sort of interesting that's come out is that you become this sort of leader in the business, and because you're a voice that people hear. I know dozens of hundreds of other investigators who are infinitely smarter than me.
Yeah.
But I write about this stuff a lot. So people are like, hey, you should go to this guy because he's talked about it. So listen, it takes a long time. And I think, there's something that you did too. When you started your podcast, I'm sure the first episode didn't have 10,000 downloads or even 1,000 or even 100. But over time you sort of,
buddy, I think I got at least 100.
So you got to be consistent. I mean, like, you have to go out there and you have to put stuff out there, and it's hard sometimes. And I imagine it was hard for you. I mean, there was a time where I was very hesitant about, expressing my voice and my opinion about certain things. And, over time, I don't care nearly as much, but you've got to be consistent and you got to go out and you just got to keep doing it. And ultimately, things start happening, and all these sort of opportunities and things that happen that I didn't necessarily think were going to happen. I mean, I don't know if I would have necessarily met you if this didn't come across. I mean, we met at osmosis, and one of the first things you talked about was, you're about to start doing this podcast. So, you wind up meeting people and the amazing relationships that I've created from doing this stuff it's just been amazing.
No, it's cool. And I think for me anyways, like starting to do the podcast, I was very uncomfortable with listening to my own voice. I was like, Jesus, this guy sounds like Kermit the Frog. Who's this clown? Like a pretender, right? I had to get like comfortable and fix my speech pattern a little bit and stop going, hey, ho, right? And I still get it. I still get I'll start developing tics of like speech patterns and things like that, which I'll become aware of fix them, and then something else will pop up. It's like you never know.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same way. And I did a course a couple of years in conjunction with PI Education, and they apparently I quite a bit.
Yes, we'll take it out. Don't worry. You get a good editor.
and he went through like 14 hours of video and edited out all the ums, and I'm listening to myself. I'm like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that I did that so much. So
you don't listen.
Yeah. And there's certain, lexicon that you use all the time that you don't really realize until you actually listen to yourself.
So yeah, here's mine. Like, is one of them, right? So I did one with Brian Joseph. She's been on a few times actually. New Orleans, great investigator, good friend of mine. So I had her on in November last year, the first time. And both of us were like, like I sat there and counted. I'm like, I think between the two of us, it must have been over 100 times we're saying, like we get it, you just stop it. Right.
Yeah.
And then that developed later into, it's kind of funny. And I've even did it like twice, I think today. And it's something I'm working on. So definitely.
Yeah, listen, you got to have thick skin when you do these kind of things too, because like you're putting yourself out there. People are going to jump on you for certain things, what you say, what you do, if you're incorrect about certain things, and you've got to sort of develop that little bit of a skin and be a little bit self-deprecating, knowing that, I'm a 100% imperfect human being.
I'm the first guy to make fun of myself. It's very easy. In fact, like I at one point I got a four star. Like I get like 5 stars on ratings, and someone gave me a 4-star, and I was so happy. I was like, yes, I've arrived. The haters are here. Give me a 2-star. Come on. 4's not good enough. And it's like you take it with a grain of salt, man. It's all good, man. It's not for everybody. I totally get it.
Yeah, but it's still like even podcasting, YouTubing, writing. If you're on social media, listen, I think in this day and age, it's important to sort of put yourself out there. And
well, not only that, man. I think it's on it for like folks like you and I that have been at it 10 plus years, right? It's our responsibility to bring up the people behind us to keep this industry going, right? And we can really lean into the Kelly Riddles and the John Hodas and the Francie Kohlers, the folks that have been around for a really, really long time, John LaJoy. Like, you reach into those people and you learn from them, right? And you take that information, that nugget, and you pass it along to the next person, right? You should always be raising up people behind you. And I think it's people that our age or at that point in our careers, like, it's our responsibility to do that. Definitely.
Yeah, and going back on what we were talking about before, I 10 years ago, there weren't a lot of people like you or me writing about this stuff or talking about this stuff, and we were kind of back in the woodwork, and it was sort of the secretive business, and putting a face, as a whole, our industry doesn't necessarily have the best reputation. So by being out there and putting ourselves out there, we're regular people, and and I think it's just important to show and for other people to learn and to make this a better industry and a more raise the bar for what we do.
Totally. So we're regular people with really interesting stories who have no idea where we're going to be on Tuesday.
Yeah.
So with that being said, I think we're going to wrap it down. We're going to wind down here. Brian, this was great, man. This was a long time coming. I respect the heck out of what you're doing. I love your writing. Please keep at it. And you have a voice, man, and you definitely bring out some really good points on things. And it's just not your everyday average article. If you're throwing out a blog, it's worth reading. How would folks go about finding that blog if they were interested in reading it?
So on my website, diligentiagroup.com/blog is where you'd find it. And you can find me on every social media platform there is. But I'm more on LinkedIn more than anything these days. But
loving LinkedIn.
You can find me anywhere.
Yeah, no politics, man. I love LinkedIn. Actually, I was on there today, and somebody had posted something and the whole like LinkedIn crowd was like, "This is politics. This is political. Go to Facebook. Get this is a business."
Yeah. I've banned Facebook from my personal life. I'm only on Instagram now, and Twitter I'll turn on every once in a while, but my blood pressure goes up like 6 points when that happens. So.
Too much, man. I just post food and music and and getting the word out on my guests. That's pretty much my Facebook these days. So
awesome.
So hey man, thank you so much. It was great chatting with you. Always a privilege. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in. And we'll catch everybody next week on the next show. Take care, everyone.
We want to thank Brian for jumping on. He's always great to talk to and has a great perspective on the industry. So please check out his blog. It's worth the read. We also like to thank Crosstracks, Merlin Locate Services, IDI Core, PI Institute for Education, and USABugSweeps.com for sponsoring the show. Make sure you check out InvestigatorSToolbox.com. Remember, it only takes 49 cents a day to unlock the future of investigations. So make an investment in your business and yourself today. The legacy discount is done, but you can still save some money. Use code PIP201836 to save an extra $20. And if you got a question or comment about the show, email Matt at matthews@satellitepi.com. You can also find him on LinkedIn, as you know, Instagram, and Facebook. We want your feedback to bring you the best shows possible. We'll be back next Monday with a new show, so make sure you tune in. Stay safe out there.